Good evening. It is one of the most famous buildings in the world. It has stood on the banks of the River Seine for more than 800 years. Tonight, Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris is completely engulfed by fire. The flames appear to have started in the roof where extensive renovation work was being carried out. They quickly took hold. The cathedral's spire collapsed into the building. It's feared very little has been saved. Huge crowds gathered in the streets around it. Many were in tears. Notre Dame took 200 years to build. It's one of the greatest treasures of medieval architecture. Tonight, it lies in ruins. Our Paris correspondent Lucy Williamson reports.
It was, said the President, a part of France that burned today. A part that stood here for 800 years through war, revolution and religious unrest. Engulfed within an hour by flames. Its ancient towers, beacons for both residents and tourists, crumbling into the blaze. As its current guardian watched through tears.
This is a national disaster. I'm very upset. This cathedral is 850 years old, and to see the building fall to pieces, the spire fall down, just as we were renovating it, all I can do is pray.
400 firefighters circled the cathedral to tackle the blaze, their cranes stretching to reach its soaring roof. A complicated and fragile operation. Simply dousing the medieval structure with water was not an option, rescue experts said, because the building could collapse. To tackle the flames inside the building, firefighters had to climb up the towers. Nothing else could reach. The flames are slowly beginning to subside now, but the damage is just beginning to reveal itself. The destruction of this medieval symbol of Paris has left the city under a pall of shock and smoke. People packed into the streets around barely spoke, just watched. President Macron, arriving at the cathedral with France's Prime Minister, had no words to offer either. His face upturned in disbelief, as in prayer. Those who found the words for their impressions, one after the other, all said the same.
This is awful. It's terribly sad. It's terrifying. The fire is uncontrollable. I've been here for 1 hour and there's nothing we can do.
The Deputy Mayor of Paris confirmed the fire had started on the roof and quickly spread. The cause isn't clear. Police have begun an investigation. But some have questioned whether extensive renovation work currently underway here might have sparked this massive blaze. The task now is to assess the destruction inside the building. Its woodwork dating from the 13th century. Its statues destroyed once before by revolutionaries 2 centuries ago. Many things are said to be irreplaceable. Great art, cultural heritage, symbols of protection and hope. What word should we use when it's all of these? Lucy Williamson, BBC News, Paris.
Well, let's get the latest now live from Lucy in Paris. And Lucy, just extraordinary scenes in Paris tonight. Does it look like firefighters will be able to save anything of the building?
Well, you could see the scale of what they were up against. This was an incredibly complicated operation, firefighters tackling it any way they could. Such an enormous structure. And not so long ago, we were being told that the whole wooden skeleton of Notre Dame was ablaze. There were real fears for the whole structure of the building, and particularly the North Tower, one of those big towers at the entrance to Notre Dame. There was real fears they wouldn't be able to save that. But the latest we're getting from the scene is that the basic stone structure now appears to be out of danger. They have managed to save at least that. The big question now, of course, is how much of the inside still remains.
Lucy Williamson with the latest there in Paris. Notre Dame sits in the very heart of Paris, on the Ile de la Cité, an island in the middle of the River Seine. The fire is believed to have started shortly before 7 o'clock local time this evening, shortly after the structure closed to the public. Firefighters say the blaze could be linked to ongoing restoration work. France is tonight mourning a cultural and historical loss. Fergal Keane reports now on the damage done to France's cultural fabric.
In Paris, the most desolate of skies, smoke and ruin and history billowing into the air.
Fire crews from across Paris have come here to save whatever they possibly can. And the striking thing, standing among the crowds on the banks of the Seine, is just the silence, the quiet of people stunned by the destruction of not just a great French cultural artefact, but of one that belonged to the world.
Notre Dame de Paris offered a vision of France that seemed eternal, even if the age of kings and emperors and powerful cardinals had long passed. It was built more than 800 years ago, when kings ruled by divine right. And grand and great cathedrals of stone and stained glass were designed to reach for the sublime.
So this is an absolutely cultural disaster for all of us, actually, not just the French, but also European significance. Paris had been the sort of hot cauldron of Gothic architecture from the 11th and 12th centuries, and it had influenced a whole lot of buildings in England, including Westminster Abbey and all our subsequent cathedrals.
Notre Dame survived Europe's devastating wars of religion and the age of revolution. It was a theatre of hubris. Napoleon was crowned emperor here by the Pope. At the end of World War II, the bells of Notre Dame pealed the hour of liberation. Its glories are a source of pride for the people of this city.
I speak to your English audience to share my immense sorrow, my immense pain in front of this catastrophe that has befallen Notre Dame. I have lived here for more than 30 years. My 3 children were baptized here. What the Germans did not destroy was ruined by a stupid fire.
Higher and higher it goes, reaching up.
The fear of a devastating fire was always present. This is the mid-1930s, when the Paris Fire Service drilled for such an eventuality. But it was a renovation in the modern age that proved catastrophic. These statues were moved for protection just last week. Tonight, Paris feels like a city that is mourning the loss of an essential part of itself. Fergal Keane, BBC News, Paris.
Well, as the fire took hold, world leaders began reacting to the terrible scenes. President Trump said it was so horrible to watch the massive fire. Theresa May said her thoughts were with the people of France. The Vatican has expressed its shock and sadness. Well, this is one of the latest pictures that we have got showing the true extent of the blaze inside. Virtually everything alight, as you can see. Let's go back now to Lucy Williamson, who is in Paris. And just looking at that image, you can see, I mean, it looks like there's going to be very little that is saved of Notre Dame.
Yes, and I think that's really beginning to sink in here in Paris. There has been all late afternoon into this evening a real sense of shock, of sadness here. But what really struck me was the silence and the feeling from people that this was a loss really beyond words. We've had the mayor of Paris, Anne Hidalgo, saying there are no words strong enough to express the pain of watching Notre Dame burn. The Prime Minister talking about grief beyond words. And you mentioned there the Vatican. They expressed their disbelief at what had happened. And I think that the image that's really going to stay with me tonight is of ordinary people in the streets around Notre Dame gathering together, singing and praying.
Breaking news, Notre Dame's medieval roof structure has been lost. Just a part of the horrific devastation from the blaze that has been ravaging the cathedral. I want to show you again the first picture that we have from inside the cathedral. There it is. And obviously that cathedral is not something anyone is going to be able to go into for a long time, but these are the first images that we have, and you can still see that heat and fire there at the top of the arches. Of course, it's impossible to know the full extent of the damage right now. That's the bottom line. Tom Foreman is out front to give us a sense of how big the fire is, the best that you can tell us right now. Tom, I mean, you have hundreds of firefighters who are working under incredibly difficult circumstances, very dangerous circumstances.
Yeah, and this wasn't an easy fire to get to either, Aaron. Those pictures are just stunning you were showing a minute ago here. Look, there are 9 different bridges that lead to Ile de la Cité, which is in the middle of the River Seine. It's an island, and they had to get through that in rush hour traffic to try to reach the cathedral. And bear in mind, the height was a big issue, too. We believe from all the images that the fire started somewhere around the base of this spire in the middle, and then it shot up that spire. This tip right up there, that's a football field above the ground, so you get a sense of how high they were having to work. So what was underneath all of this as it spread to the entire roof? Well, we know that underneath was, as your previous guest noted, extraordinary treasures, a beautiful, soaring, open space. There were, in certain areas here, like the area called the choir, really intricate and beautiful carvings. So there was a lot of wood inside this stone building to feed the fire. There were also other things that would draw a lot of attention to people here. For example, the organ. This was last renovated in a big way in 1730, but it's older than that. It has more than 8,000 pipes, 5 keyboards. We don't really know the fate of the organ at this point. One of the most famous musical instruments in the world. And, of course, the rose windows, just mentioned a moment ago. About 13 million tourists a year come, and this is one of the main things that draws them. These extraordinary pieces of stained glass, some of the best you'll find anywhere on the planet, Aaron.
And that's just some of the history, Tom, of what's inside that building that, of course, the president of France had just said is, the heart and soul of France. Obviously, it's a Catholic cathedral. It's a religious building, but it is much, much more than that.
Oh, yeah, there's a reason this is a World Heritage Site. Remember, this is where Napoleon became an emperor. This is where Joan of Arc started on her path to becoming a saint. This is where so many giant world events, world wars, swirled around. And there are paintings, and there are drawings, and there are architectural plans that were all stored here. Notably, there is also this. You may have heard people talk about the crown of thorns. This is a religious relic which true believers believe is the crown worn by Christ on his way to crucifixion. Imagine the importance of this relic during this Easter season. And beyond all that, there is still at least some positive news. As your guest mentioned, maybe things are being saved here. We know that more than a dozen priceless statues were removed as part of this renovation just last week, Aaron. So we have to hope for a lot more good news like that.
All right, Tom Foreman, thank you very much. I want to go now to John LaFemina, former battalion chief for the New York Fire Department. And John, look, I appreciate your time. You've got over 6 hours so far of the fire, and obviously you have parts, as you can see from those first internal pictures, where it is still, whatever that structure may be that we are looking at in some of those, but completely red with the heat. What makes it so difficult to put out a fire like this one?
Well, the age of the building, the type of construction, the components that it's made from, mostly non-combustible surrounding exterior. That's still what's remaining. All the roof supports, all the interior framing is all wood. Very dry, burns very well. And you saw how quickly the fire spread. And that's what you're seeing as what's left, and is probably going to burn for a while until it either extinguishes itself or the water does.
And the question on this one, you obviously, the point you're pointing out, there's so much wood in there, but you have all of this stone and obviously 850-year-old structure of, bits and pieces constructed over hundreds of years. But I mean, you're talking about an incredible amount of stone, and stone that I would imagine they fully know exactly how secure or insecure it is given the age of the building.
Well, before the fire, of course, it was probably very secure, probably almost as secure as when it was built in whatever chronological order it came. The fire does change that, right? We have some serious structural damage. We have some loads placed on the structure that we weren't intending, so we don't know what was weakened and what wasn't. That's going to come after the fire is extinguished. From what I've seen, looking at the internet, I see some, it looks like the exterior structure will remain intact. There could be localized collapses, inward or outward, depending upon how the heat has affected that. But it looks like most of it, the masonry part will stand. And then, of course, whoever is technologically capable of determining what's needed to make sure it's structurally sound to rebuild will have to do that.
John, during all of this today, President Trump tweeted, "So horrible to watch the massive fire at Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. Perhaps flying water tankers could be used to put it out. Must act quickly." In all of this, what was happening today, obviously the French Civil Defense Agency was angry enough to respond in English. Well, they tweeted in English this after that. "Hundreds of firemen of the Paris Fire Brigade are doing everything they can to bring the terrible fire under control. All means are being used except for water bombing aircrafts, which, if used, could lead to the collapse of the entire structure of the cathedral." Now, obviously, John, I'm not asking you to weigh in on the politics of the president weighing in with his personal opinion on a fire or their decision to respond. But They obviously wanted to dismiss what he said, suggesting this flying water tankers. Why would that not have worked?
Well, I think for the reasons they said. You may have a load that hits the building. The water has a weight, and it can come down with significant force and cause a collapse that's unintended. That's not the traditional way in which we would fight a fire like this. That's more for forest fires, where the damage that may incur is not critical to kind of keeping the structure as much intact as possible.
All right. Thank you very much for explaining that so clearly. John, thanks for your time.
Okay, thank you.